Hello and welcome to episode 222 of Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty. Of course, I am your host, Rick Doherty. Today is the 36th birthday of Walt Disney World's third theme park, Disney's Hollywood Studios, or as it was known on the opening day of May 1st of 1989, Disney-MGM Studios. I'll be flying solo on the show today as we return to our series about the tenure of former Disney chairman and CEO Michael Eisner. It was Eisner who pushed for Disney-MGM Studios, and it was an important step in the growth of the company. This episode will be about the Disney-MGM Studios from the early idea stages as an attraction in a completely different theme park and through the initial years of operation. This is also the first new park I can remember attending. My family visited Walt Disney World a few times when it was just Magic Kingdom and Epcot, and I remember the first time we went down with 3 theme parks. Before we get started, I think you know the drill. Go to the Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty YouTube channel, like, comment, and subscribe. Share episodes of the podcast and share vlogs with your friends who love theme parks and travel. These Michael Eisner episodes, for example, have been very popular. They're definitely bringing more views to the channel, but they aren't always bringing an influx of new subscribers to the channel. It just takes 30 seconds to do it, and it helps us more than you will ever know. You're going to be seeing some different types of videos on the channel with some of our life changes of the past few months. Check out some of the videos. Drop comments on the ones you like, because that is how we decide what types of videos we're going to keep doing for the channel. On May 1st of 1989, Michael Eisner officially announced the opening of a new park at Walt Disney World. He said, quote, "The world you have entered was created by the Walt Disney Company, and it is dedicated to Hollywood. Not a place on a map, but a state of mind that exists whenever people dream and wonder and imagine. A place where illusion and reality are fused by technological magic. We welcome you to a Hollywood that never was and always will be." The initial seeds of Disney-MGM Studios were planted in 1982, no matter who you believe when it comes to the creation of the park. Epcot officially opened to the public on October 1st, 1982, with plenty of land to expand the park with new ideas. With that in mind, Imagineers Marty Sklar and Randy Bright were tasked with leading a team to come up with ideas for new pavilions in the section of Epcot known as Future World at the time. One of those ideas ended up being the Wonders of Life Pavilion, which ran from October 19th, 1989 to New Year's Day of 2007. The pavilion was focused on health and fitness and featured 2 major attractions in Cranium Command and Body Wars. Honestly, the Wonders of Life Pavilion could end up being its own podcast episode one day. The other plan from Sklar and Bright's group was for a pavilion in between the Imagination Pavilion and the Land Pavilion, focused on movies. The Great Movie Ride was going to have a soundstage backdrop and have guests entering through a movie theater style facade. By the time Michael Eisner had taken over the job of chairman and CEO of the Walt Disney Company, he wanted to know if Imagineering could expand on the plans for a movie-themed pavilion and make the Great Movie Ride an anchor attraction for a third theme park at Walt Disney World. It's at this point in the story that we're going to put on our tinfoil conspiracy theory hats. Michael Eisner took the job at Disney after a successful run with Paramount Pictures. In 1982, while Eisner was still with Paramount, Universal pitched the idea of adding a version of their backlot tram tour from Hollywood to the tourism hub of Orlando. While the timing would indicate that it is possible Eisner could have seen these plans, Disney claims that he was never in any of those conversations while at Paramount, and that Walt Disney World was already working on the preliminary plans for Disney-MGM Studios in 1981. This would lead to a contentious relationship with the two companies after Universal announced Universal Studios Florida, and Disney followed with an announcement for Disney-MGM Studios in 1987. Since Universal's plans had changed from an East Coast studio tram tour to an entire studio-themed theme park, Disney had the upper hand in construction. Eisner, by all accounts, was eager to get his studio park up and running before Universal, and Universal didn't have the experience putting together a park of that size. Those are just some of the reasons Disney was able to cut the ribbon on Disney-MGM Studios more than 13 months before Universal Studios Florida opened to the public. There were just 5 attractions when Disney-MGM Studios welcomed guests on May Day of 1989, and only 2 of those attractions could be considered traditional rides. Of course, the Great Movie Ride was the centerpiece of the proposed Epcot Pavilion, and it would be the anchor of this new park. Housed inside a recreation of the Grauman's Chinese Theater in Hollywood, the Great Movie Ride took guests on a trip through the history of cinema. There were several early names for the ride, including Great Moments at the Movies, but when Coca-Cola agreed to sponsor, they wanted to make sure guests understood it was a ride and not a film. The Great Movie Ride seemed like the perfect moniker to keep tourists in the know about what they were about to experience. In the early years, there were 2 different versions of the ride on busier times of day, but everybody started the ride by loading into the vehicles from a film set in a large soundstage. Of course, the first song you would hear was Hooray for Hollywood, and that would lead you through the narration setting up the ride. The first rooms focused on musicals and featured legendary films like By a Waterfall, with its Cake of Starlets, which was always an incredible sight. There were animatronics of Gene Kelly from Singin' in the Rain and Julie Andrews and Dick Van Dyke from Mary Poppins. I know that seeing Mary and Bert high atop the roofs of London always set the tone for me personally. I had always wished there was a full Mary Poppins ride, and I guess after the cancellation of plans for an expansion to the UK Pavilion in Epcot, my memories of the Great Movie Ride will remain the closest I'll get for some time. The ride then moved on to a section on westerns with animatronics of Clint Eastwood and John Wayne. When I first experienced this ride, I had only seen one of the movies being portrayed up until this point, and that was Mary Poppins. However, one thing Disney did really well at the time was focus on the iconic. I may never have watched a Clint Eastwood or John Wayne movie, but they were so ubiquitous in pop culture that I knew them. I never sat down in front of the television to see Singing in the Rain, but I was aware of the iconic image of Gene Kelly hanging from the lamppost holding an umbrella. Alien was the next movie to be featured in the ride with an animatronic of Sigourney Weaver's character Ellen Ripley. This section featured a little jump scare with the alien actually attempting to attack riders. It was then off to the world of Indiana Jones as Indy and Sala tried to lift the Ark of the Covenant in a scene from Raiders of the Lost Ark. To pay tribute to the horror genre, the vehicle moved through a burial chamber of mummies, and then it was on to Tarzan and Jane. This was before Disney's animated version of Tarzan, but once again, the characters were so iconic that basically everybody had a working knowledge of the intellectual property. Animatronics of Humphrey Bogart and Ingrid Bergman brought the legendary runway scene from Casablanca to life before a film projection of Mickey Mouse as the Sorcerer's Apprentice. My second favorite scene after the Mary Poppins room had to be visiting Munchkin Land from The Wizard of Oz. Disney has always had a turbulent relationship with the Wizard of Oz IP, seemingly trying multiple business maneuvers to acquire the brand. Not only did it never work out quite the way Disney wanted, now Universal is in line for the theme park rights with the movie Wicked. That would be a little poetic justice for Universal more than 35 years after Eisner beat them to the punch on a movie-based theme park in the Orlando area. The ride would end with classic film moments put up on the screens. Obviously, replacing the Great Movie Ride with Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway is still a controversial move for many in the Disney community. Personally, as a kid, I last visited Disney-MGM Studios in 1993, and I did not return until the park was already renamed Disney's Hollywood Studios in October of 2018. I was quite disappointed when it was announced that the Great Movie Ride would be closed before our vacation in 2018. I actually think my personal experience was pretty emblematic of the overall view of the Great Movie Ride. I really liked the attraction. It left an imprint on some of my earliest experiences at Walt Disney World. Still, when I was on vacation in 2005 and 2015, I limited my park time to Magic Kingdom, Epcot, and Disney's Animal Kingdom. The Great Movie Ride wasn't enough to pull me over to that particular theme park. So yes, I was upset that the ride was closed in 2018, but if it was really important to me, I probably would have tried to experience it one of those other times I was on property. For all the hand-wringing about the change in recent years, it doesn't replace the fact that the ride was routinely a 5, 10, or 15-minute wait for years. Guest demand wasn't reflecting what Disney fans were saying was important to them. Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway opened at such a bizarre time, around 1 week before the pandemic closures in 2020. This meant that wait times for the attraction were probably artificially inflated for quite a few years. We're finally starting to see this ride look less like an e-ticket when compared to the other major rides at the park. The argument could also be made that the current incarnation of the park wastes so much space in areas like Animation Courtyard that there were other locations that would have worked better for Mickey and Minnie's and that we could have kept the Great Movie Ride. Business-wise, the licensing issues to keep these iconic characters in a ride that only drew 10-minute lines would probably not have been worth it to the company. Still, I think everyone would agree that there's something missing in Disney's Hollywood Studios that would be made a little better with these classic movie references. The other opening day ride at Disney-MGM Studios was the Studio Backlot Tour. While I actually remember the original version of this attraction, which was extremely long, I am a little fuzzy on the details, so as I go back and look at the ride, I hope I don't have anything out of place. It's very possible that I do, but this is still a pretty good look at the attraction. The tour drove through New York Street in the streets of America, but that didn't last all that long because the park was being bombarded with so many guests in the early years. To reduce the length of the attraction and to give guests more space to spread out throughout the park, New York Street was taken off the backlot tour and turned into a public walking area. The tram would take guests past the Earful Tower water tower that served as the park icon in the early years. This was the closest that you could get to the tower. Weaving through costumes and material buildings and moving to an outdoor area known as the Boneyard, riders were shown vehicles from many famous films. There was the steamroller used by Judge Doom in Who Framed Roger Rabbit, cars from Herbie the Love Bug, and vehicles from Star Wars and Indiana Jones. I specifically remember getting excited about the drone ship from Flight of the Navigator because that was a movie I saw when I was really young. The prop has now been repainted and sits at the top of a drink stand in Tomorrowland in Magic Kingdom. At that point, the tram went to Catastrophe Canyon, the most iconic part of the tram tour, to show guests how you would film a disaster scene in Hollywood. Catastrophe Canyon experienced a simulated earthquake with some flooding and the explosion of a gas truck. This was the end of the tram part of the tour, and it became a walking backlot tour after that. The other three attractions on opening day were the Magic of Disney Animation Tour, Superstar Television, and the Monster Sound Show. Superstar Television actually had members of the audience pulled up to play a part in a clip from a live-action television show. I've always personally loved the show Cheers. Even as a kid, I watched it obsessively every day. Cheers was one of the shows you could be plugged into during Superstar television, and I always wanted to get the chance to be picked to be a character on Cheers. Obviously, in retrospect, cast members were not going to pick a 12-year-old boy to play a character sitting at a bar, but I didn't know that at the time. I was once picked to play Gilligan in Gilligan's Island, so I guess that's something, right? With less than a month left in the 1980s, Disney-MGM Studios got one of the most groundbreaking rides at the time, and the Disneyland version was the first ride in a Disney park that was based off of a non-Disney IP. Star Tours opened at Disneyland in Anaheim in 1987, and a second version opened at Tokyo Disneyland earlier in the summer of 1989. On December 15th, the ride came to Disney-MGM Studios. This was a game changer. Once again, I was a young kid and I hadn't seen any of the Star Wars movies at this point. It didn't matter because everyone knew Star Wars. It was a brand that was as iconic as Casablanca, Wizard of Oz, or Singing in the Rain. That was where, in my mind, early Disney-MGM Studios succeeded. Everything felt big. It wasn't just a park about the movies, it was a park about blockbuster movies. Listen, I understand that the current version of Star Tours allows for a lot more re-rideability because it can change scenes each and every ride. Still, this original version will always be my favorite. There were no 3D glasses, so it wasn't as easy to feel motion sickness. Along with R2-D2 and C-3PO from the movies, Captain Rex was going to pilot you to an excursion to Endor. Of course, on your way, you would be caught in a fight between the New Republic and the Imperial Remnant. Captain Rex was voiced by Paul Reubens, aka Pee Wee Herman. Needless to say, that was about the biggest celebrity in the world to a 9-year-old kid. The new version removes Captain Rex, but he has, of course, returned to Star Wars Galaxy's Edge as DJ Rex in Oga's Cantina. You can even see the crash site from Rex's last Star Tours mission when he decided to give up the life of a pilot for a job spinning tunes in Black Spire Outpost. Of course, Star Tours wasn't even the first George Lucas property to find a home in Disney-MGM Studios. Indiana Jones was not just a part of the Great Movie Ride, but on August 25th of 1989, the Indiana Jones Epic Stunt Spectacular opened in the Echo Lake area of the park. This show really captures the original purpose of Disney-MGM Studios. After more than 35 years, it may not seem as groundbreaking, but putting on these major movie stunt shows in a theme park multiple times throughout the day and incorporating regular tourists into the show, this was something really unique. Going through the most iconic action scenes of Raiders of the Lost Ark, there was drama, humor, action, and of course, explosions. It took a long time for this show to return after the 2020 pandemic closings. To be honest, I was actually surprised that it did return. The Bourne Stunt Show at Universal Studios Florida has taken this concept and raised it to a completely different level. As innovative as this show seemed upon first view when George H.W. Bush was still in his first year as president, after seeing the Bourne Stunt Show, I'm starting to think this space could be used in a better way. The overall theme has changed at Disney's Hollywood Studios. It's no longer about how movies are made, and it is now about putting guests inside their favorite movies. This show just doesn't seem to fit anymore, in my humble opinion. Of course, I have to talk about Muppet Vision 3D, the attraction that is set for closure on June 7th of this year. This closure is proving to be even more controversial than that of the Great Movie Ride, but there's a lot of history wrapped up in the fact that the Muppets even appear in a Walt Disney World theme park. On August 28th of 1989, Disney announced that they came to terms in principle to purchase Henson Associates and the Muppets characters. Not only did the original plans call for a Muppet Vision 3D attraction, but there was also talk about an entire Muppets land that would also feature the great Muppet movie ride, where the Muppets would disrupt many legendary movies. Unfortunately, at the age of 53, Jim Henson died on May 16th of 1990, and that delayed a lot of the plans, business deals, and production involved in A Muppet's Land. Henson had already voiced characters in Muppet Vision 3D and directed the project, which would be the final major project before his death. That meant that the show itself was able to open on May 16th of 1991, 1 year to the day after he passed. The plans for the Great Muppet Movie Ride would be scrapped. In some promotional material, Muppet Vision 3D was referred to as Muppet Vision 4D due to a live-action character and animatronics. The show features an animatronic penguin orchestra, the character of Bean Bunny, and the cranky but lovable critics of Statler and Waldorf. In my opinion, the entire show is made by Statler and Waldorf. They have such classic lines like suggesting the Penguin Orchestra took the job for the halibut, saying that a very moving moment should be moved to Pittsburgh, and claiming the only reason they were there is because they entered a contest and lost. Sweetums appears as a life-sized, live-action character in this show. This is one of the things that made Muppet Vision 3D so special, but also probably led to its demise because it isn't cheap to have that type of performer for that many showings per day. What always struck me were the effects to make it look like the studio was damaged at the end of the show. It would have been so easy for them to make all of the destruction confined to just the screen, but those 4D effects really made it look real. Back in November, it was announced that Muppet Vision 3D, along with all of Muppet Courtyard, would be replaced with a Monsters, Inc. land, including a Monsters, Inc. roller coaster. While the changes will come with a Muppets roller coaster being added to the other end of the park to replace Aerosmith Rock and Roller Coaster, I think a lot of people are going to miss this nostalgic attraction that was accessible to people of all ages. We will see if Disney lives up to its word. The company claims that it will be going through great pains to preserve Muppet Vision 3D. I hope this is true. Part of me is very nervous that we'll start to see props from the pre-show in the Lakeland Antique Mall by the end of 2025. I understand that the theme parks aren't museums, but this feels just like a cash grab. And with all of the unused space in Disney's Hollywood studios, it also seems like a rather unnecessary cash grab. I think the biggest addition that separates the early years of Disney-MGM Studios and the theme park we have today is the creation of the Twilight Zone Tower of Terror, which is celebrating its 30th anniversary. This was undoubtedly a half-day park before the opening of Tower of Terror. Michael Eisner had a teenage son who definitely impacted his views of the theme parks. Eisner knew that the parks were popular for families with small children, but he wanted to add some more appeal to adults without children. This is basically the creation of the dreaded Disney adult, and to teenagers who were looking for more thrills in their theme parks. With the ultra-immersive theming that was a marquee of the Eisner years, combined with an innovative non-repeating drop sequence, Tower of Terror was part Haunted Mansion and part Space Mountain. Anchoring the right side of the park at the end of the newly added Sunset Boulevard, Tower of Terror drastically expanded the size of Disney-MGM Studios itself. Now, Disney always intended on expanding that side of the park, but the Twilight Zone Tower of Terror was not the original idea. I've said this before on the show, but it is true. It would be hard to explain to kids today the extreme popularity of Who Framed Roger Rabbit in the late 80s and early 90s. Roger Rabbit as a character was right up there with Mickey Mouse when it came to advertising the parks. The closest comparison I could make in recent years would be Frozen. Just like Disney rushed to put Anna and Elsa into every theme park, a stage show at Magic Kingdom, a sing-along at Hollywood Studios, and a complete takeover of the Norway Pavilion in Epcot, Disney wanted Roger Rabbit everywhere in Walt Disney World. Roger Rabbit still has some presence at Hollywood Studios. You can see Eddie Valiant's office with a Roger Rabbit-size hole in the blinds on top of Hollywood and Vine Restaurant. There's a billboard for Maroon cartoons featuring Roger and Jessica Rabbit with Baby Herman in the Echo Lake area. Roger Rabbit's paw prints can also be found on the ground outside of the Chinese Theater. The original plan, however, was to have an entire land known as Roger Rabbit's Hollywood. There were many incarnations of this land planned. Ironically, the only ride from these plans that ever came to fruition was Roger Rabbit's cartoon Spin, which didn't open until January of 1994 on the completely opposite coast. Cartoon Spin can still be found to this day in Toontown at Disneyland in Anaheim, California. The immense success of Who Framed Roger Rabbit caught everyone off guard, and there was even a rush to try to put out a sequel. That is when rights, agreements, and who actually owned how much of what started to lead into some major disputes. One of the biggest factors in the success of the movie was the combination of different cartoon brands, from the Disney characters to Looney Tunes to other prominent animation companies. Bringing all of these companies together reduced risk for the original project, but it amplified the difficulty in finding permanent places for the IP and theme park rides, and really limited the ability to get everyone back together for another movie. By that time, it was the height of the Disney Renaissance. There was The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, Lion King, and so much more on the horizon. Roger Rabbit was a much more important and relevant IP to the company in 1989 and 1990 than he was in even 1992. Why go through the headache of trying to keep everyone happy with a Roger Rabbit land when Aladdin was just as popular and you own all the rights to that? Another early attraction that was proposed for Disney-MGM Studios that never saw the light of day was Dick Tracy's Crime Stoppers. Plans would suggest the track layout for the ride would have been similar to that of Dinosaur at Disney's Animal Kingdom or the Indiana Jones ride at Disneyland. Trying to explain the Roger Rabbit phenomenon is difficult, but trying to explain the Dick Tracy hype is almost impossible. In honor of the 35th anniversary of the Dick Tracy movie, my co-host Maz and I have agreed that we're going to watch it for the first time in probably 33 years for both of us, and we're going to do an episode about it. Warren Beatty, one of the biggest Hollywood A-listers of all time, bought the rights to Dick Tracy so he could make a dark version of a kid's comic book and try to piggyback off the Batman craze. Warren Beatty, Madonna, Al Pacino, Dustin Hoffman, Dick Van Dyke, and tons of other famous actors and actresses rushed to be a part of this big budget event. The flop was hard, but Disney really put a lot of backing into it. We'll talk more about it in that future episode about the impact that Dick Tracy's flop had on Eisner and the company as a whole. It's just interesting to wonder, however, if they had built a top-tier e-ticket attraction based on Dick Tracy, whether it would have impacted the fate of the movie. Even if the initial box office numbers underwhelmed, would the presence in the theme parks have made it a favorite for cable or video rentals? Over the years, Disney-MGM Studios played host to unique non-Disney intellectual properties like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, and Twilight Zone. It turned into the park for Star Wars. It's starting to morph into a Pixar park. In recent years, people have started rumors about other potential bizarre additions. When Universal finally bails on The Simpsons, that will be a popular brand that Disney will be able to start putting in the theme parks. There has even been talk of people receiving surveys from Disney, gauging their interest in seeing The Simpsons in the theme parks. It would seem, based on current trends, that Disney's Hollywood Studios would be the logical spot for a land based on The Simpsons. Let's not even get started on the Marvel contract. From seeing how the movies are made to trying to live the movies themselves, A lot has changed since Michael Eisner proclaimed the opening of the park that celebrated the Hollywood that never was and always will be. This has been episode 222 of Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty. Happy May Day to all of our great working class listeners. Starting next week, we're going to be focusing a lot of our attention on Epic Universe, which will officially be opening to the public on May 23rd. Next week, Maz and I are going to have an open discussion about how to deal with another Harry Potter Land opening and generating more money for J.K. Rowling as she continues to show herself to be a horrible person with transphobic and homophobic tweets. I did not grow up with Harry Potter books or movies, so it doesn't impact my life as much as it impacts Maz. We're just going to rant and try to come to terms with how this one person's insane and targeted hatred will impact our enjoyment of this new theme park that looks almost perfect in every other aspect. In 2 weeks, Maz and I will start breaking down some of the other lands in the park. If we can work out the schedule, that will be followed by my other co-host, Sarah Says, joining me to cover some of the other areas of the park. We will be spending the entire rest of May and possibly into June talking about Epic Universe. We really have a lot planned for the next few months. Just recently, I purchased more video and audio equipment for the YouTube channel. I recently moved back to the Northeast after 6 years in Florida. My vlogs will not revolve around Disney and Universal as much, but I did save a lot of Disney and Universal content when I knew I was going to move. I'll be traveling around the Northeast all summer to bring you history, nature, baseball, and other travel content. Just last week, a local minor league baseball team did a giveaway of Hershey Park tickets. Not only did I get to see the game, but I'll also have a vlog coming from Hershey Park. I'm going to be upping the professionalism of some of these videos because I want to continue to grow the channel. Of course, I'm also planning on returning to Walt Disney World in September before my annual pass expires. I may even try to grab an Epic Universe ticket at the same time. Do me a favor, make sure you're subscribed to the Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty YouTube channel so you don't miss any of those things. As always, go back and check out older videos, like and comment on them if you truly like them. All of that helps us. We recently passed 2,000 subscribers, which is a big deal, but that means that a lot of listeners aren't subscribed. Thank you for listening. Like I said, another brand new episode of the show is coming next Thursday. Until then, have a great week.